Hi there, I'm so glad you're here. This is Jennifer McGuire, and today I have a technique and card showcase for you. So basically, I'm taking products from all different categories, such as stamps, dies, stencils, and embossing folders, and showing you different techniques for them. And I have lots of cards. So these techniques are kind of all over the place, but I think it's a good reminder that no matter what products you have on hand, you can come up with new ways to use them. Now, I am using some newer products from Stamptember, the Simon Says Stamp release. These are products that will be restocked, and you're going to see a lot of inspiration out on the internet with these, but I'm also incorporating some older products into it. These are techniques that you can use with products you have on hand also. Again, we're going to cover lots of things today. And another great thing is many of today's techniques are ones that can be done quickly to make cards. Let's get started with this example here. This one is definitely my favorite. So I'm using the new Simon Says Stamp Boho Flowers 3D embossing folder. Here I used gold matte metallic cardstock so you can see the detail really nicely. There are coordinating dies available that cut out 3 flowers that you can then put into the embossing folder and run through so you can have embossed die cuts. You could use those separately or line them up with your embossed background. I will not be using the dies today, but if you wanted to step this card up, you could add those popped up flowers. For today's card, I'm starting with a piece of heavyweight white cardstock, and I'm applying an uneven amount of ink. I'm using the newest colors of the Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated ink line. These include Periwinkle, Clematis, and Crocus. I love these 3 colors. I'll actually show you a little sample of them in a moment. Now I'm putting an uneven amount because that's the look I want today, but you could do smoother if you wanted to. You could also start with a light color of cardstock if you prefer. So first I did a light amount of that light periwinkle color. Then I'll come in with the medium clematis. And by the way, those are the 3 colors there. Periwinkle, clematis, and crocus is the darkest. Beautiful colors. It's like the perfect combination of blue and purple, and I'm crazy about it. You'll see me use these inks a lot. Now, after I did an uneven amount of the light color and the medium color, it's time for the fun technique. I'm putting a little bit of tape runner on the back of this panel, and I'll put it into the 3D embossing folder, and I'm placing it onto the side where the flowers are raised. I will then run that through my die cut machine. These folders work with pretty much any machine you have, and over on the Simon Says Stamp website for the embossing folder, you'll see the different sandwich options. For the Spellbinders Platinum 6, I use the platform. I think that's the B plate, the white plate, and a shim. And I'll run that through. There's nothing on top of that embossing folder. I like to kind of go back and forth and look at how beautiful this is already. I like how that uneven inking that I did just creates a lot of interest. But we're going to step this up. I'm leaving that panel in the embossing folder, and on the other side of the folder, I will apply the darkest ink. This is the crocus color. I just kind of dab it on there lightly. And this is the side where the flowers are indented, so the background is raised. So basically, you're putting ink onto the background. Then you'll close it, run it through your die cut machine, and that presses the ink onto our inked panel. And look at how gorgeous that is. Now, I like to repeat the process twice, so I'll do it again. That just makes it darker. Now, I've done this technique before in videos, but I've never done it with like this tone-on-tone look where I inked first with the light colors, and then I did the embossing folder technique with the dark color, and I'm crazy about it. I think it'd be fun to do a bunch of different backgrounds in different colors. So maybe one with all shades of pink, one with all shades of red, and it'd be a great set of cards to give as a gift. But look at this. I just think it is gorgeous. So now to clean my embossing folder, I just use a little bit of rubbing alcohol and a dry cloth. And then it'll be as good as new and ready for our next card. Now this next step is optional. I'm taking a sanding block and just lightly sanding some of the raised areas. This will just take the top bits and turn them white, exposing that white cardstock behind it. So this gives little highlights to our background. Now if you sanded a lot, you'd have a lot more white showing, but I only wanted little highlights. I just feel like it makes that background pop even more. You can use sandpaper for this, but these sandy blocks are inexpensive and very handy. So there we have a background, and it didn't take long to do at all. You could do that with any dye inks you may have, but the positively saturated inks are great for it. Next, I wanted to create a unique card base. So I'll be using the new Simon Says Stamp A2 Postage rectangle dies. You really could use any rectangle dies here with a fancy edge, such as scallop would work nice too, but I thought the Postage was nice. I'm taking the largest Postage die, which is 4¼ by 5½ inches, and I cut it twice from white cardstock. I also trimmed my background down to be slightly smaller, and I'm gluing it onto one of those white postage pieces. The other white postage piece, I'm putting a score line about 3/4 inch from the top edge. I will then fold back and forth along that score line and put strong liquid adhesive above the score line, and then I'll lay the other panel onto it. This creates a card base. That fold line is like a hinge that allows the card to open and close. You can do this with any large shape die. I thought this postage edge was fun. For sentiment, I used much older products from Simon Says Stamp. I have the Big Thanks Dies. I did the shadow from white and the word thanks from silver. And then the sentiment underneath it, I silver heat embossed from the Clean Line Gratitude stamp set. And it says, "You have been so kind." I thought it'd be fun to put it at a diagonal. Honestly, the diagonal is because I didn't want to cover up certain flowers, and that's how the sentiment fit best. But I think the diagonal is fun with the simple card design. So this technique really did not take long to do at all. You could really create that card base and add any sentiment you want as needed later on. It would work for a lot of different occasions, but I'm always looking for thanks cards, so I went ahead and did that. I wish you could see and feel this in real life because the different layers of depth to it is just gorgeous. Now with this card, the flowers are raised, and with our next technique, the flowers will be impressed. So I'll be using a different embossing folder, but it's kind of a reverse technique, but it gives a similar look, and sometimes one works better than others depending on your embossing folder. So with this example, I am using another new 3D embossing folder from Simon Says Stamp. This is the Stitched Flowers embossing folder. So here you can see what it looks like when it's embossed with gold cardstock. I love how you have raised flowers and then raised dots on the flowers also. So I used this embossing folder with white cardstock, and I trimmed it down to be a smaller piece. I just wanted a smaller piece for my card design. This time I'm flipping the panel over, so I'm inking the back of the panel. So in this case, the background of my pattern is raised up to the camera and the flowers are indented. At the center of the flowers, I'm putting that light periwinkle color. I told you I loved it. Just a little bit at the center, fading out to white at the tips of those petals. Then I'll come in with the dark crocus ink and a Tim Holtz brayer. I really like the Tim Holtz brayer. It's great for this. And I'm lightly rolling this color over the raised area. And remember, the raised area in this case is the background. So in this case, the flowers are indented. On our last technique, the flowers are popped up. And it just gives you two different ways to do a technique with similar looks. By the way, if you don't have a brayer, you could go direct to paper with the ink pad, but you want to be very light-handed so that the ink only lands on the raised areas. Now here's a closer look. I think it's really fun and beautiful. The first technique would also work with this embossing folder, but I wanted to show you a different way that you could do this. Now next I'm using the Simon Says Stamp A7 Frame Dies. These are all frames that are proportioned for 5x7 cards, but I find I use them a lot on my A2 cards also. Before adding these pieces, I use the Simon Says Stamp Wavy Ways embossing folder on the front of my note card. So that's a 4¼ by 5½ inch note card. I like to mix two different embossing folders on one card. I think it creates a really cool look with lots of interest, and it doesn't take long to do. Usually I like to do a geometric one with something that is a little more free-flowing. I then created a frame using one of those A7 frame dies. I die cut it 3 times from white cardstock, stacked it, and put it around my inked piece up in the top left corner. For the sentiment, I used the Simon Says Stamp All About You stamp set. That's an older one. I stamped Miss You in black and used the coordinating die to cut it out. And I didn't add anything else to this. So again, this is a quicker card to pull together, and you could do this with a lot of different embossing folders and for a lot of different occasions. You could add some gems or other things to this, but I felt like the texture really gave enough to this card that you don't need any more details. What I really like about this technique is that it gives you an opportunity to have a dark background with the flowers being very light. Here's another example of the technique I just did, but I started by inking with yellow ink for those flowers and then did that crocus on top. So if you want bold cards, these both are techniques worth trying. Now that I showed you how to get this dark background with an embossing folder, let's do so with stencils. This is something you can do with a lot of different stencils you have on hand, and it worked perfect with the particular stencils I chose to use in today's video. I will be using the new Simon Says Stamp Spooky Eyes stencils. There are 2 stencils in the set. And notice on the packaging an example of the results you get from these stencils. You have like a light color background like white, and then you can do colorful eyes on it. That's how the stencil works. However, I really wanted a black background with colorful eyes, so it looks like they're glowing. So we got to do a little technique to make this happen, but it's not hard to do. I will take the first stencil that has the large eye openings, and I'll tape it onto a piece of white cardstock. Now I'm just putting tape on one edge that will form a hinge. I will then kind of open that up so I can ink the back side of the stencil. Now you could use a variety of inks here, just like you could use a variety of inks for the techniques I showed you earlier with the 3D embossing folders. I want a very dark black background, so I'm choosing the darkest black ink that I have, which is Altenew Obsidian Black Pigment ink. You could also use the Simon Says Stamp VersaFine black ink, which I'll end up using later on. Now, but you could do anything here. You could do like a dark purple ink or a dark navy, whatever you want. You could even go light with this if you prefer. Now I'm putting as much ink as I can onto the back of the stencil. Don't worry if it kind of bubbles up. If you're using a dye ink, it really doesn't matter. This technique will be forgiving in the end. I then carefully close it and I run it through my die cut machine using the sandwich that is recommended when embossing with a die, dry embossing with a die. So that involves that flexible gray embossing mat. I'm laying this on top of that flexible gray embossing mat, putting the top plate on and running it through. You may need to put a folded piece of cardstock in there as a shim to get a little more pressure. It depends on your machine. But again, follow whatever sandwich your machine recommends for dry embossing with a die. So now you can see that black ink transferred from the back of the stencil onto my cardstock. And I'm going to repeat that to make it even darker. So I'll do the exact same process again. Depending on what type of ink you use, you may need to repeat the process a few times, but it really doesn't take long at all. Thankfully, this ink cleans up very easily, so I can clean up that mess with no problem. And now we have a dark background instead of the white background, which is what you get when you just use the stencils normally. So you can transfer ink with any stencils like this. I just think it's really cool in cases like this because the focal points end up really light or bright and your background can be dark. So now I can add the coloring into the eyes. So I'm using the stencils as normal now. It'll line up just fine. And I am using 3 different colors of Positively saturated ink. I'm using some orange, some green, and some purple. So we have Cantaloupe, Limalicious, and Orchid. And I'm putting these colors heavier towards the inside of the eyes and kind of fading to white on the tips. I really like that contrast of light areas with the dark background. And switch to the second stencil, and over this I'll do the black ink again. Now, some fun things you could do with this. You could use the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder over the entire eye area. You would just use a Versamark ink or a clear embossing ink over that first stencil and put a lot of that ink over the opening and then add the glow-in-the-dark embossing powder. You could do sparkle embossing powder. You could do glossy accents on this, many different things that you can do. But I chose to instead spray with a glitter dust. I'm really liking glitter dust lately because it puts really fine glitter down that doesn't really rub off. I just take this outside. I do a quick spray over the stencil. I clean the stencil right away, and I end up with a little bit of sparkle in the eyes. It is hard to see in the video, but in real life, it catches the light beautifully. So really, you could add anything you want to these to kind of step up the eyes of this background, but I think it's extra special with the dark black around the eyes. Once again, I chose to use the A7 Frame Dies. Remember, these are really designed for 5x7 cards, but I'm again using them on an A2 card, which is 4¼ by 5½ inches. There are many ways you can use these frame dies, as I showed you earlier, but this time I thought I would do something a bit at an angle. I think when I have a fun background that I really want to showcase, I like to keep the rest of the card simple, and this angle idea works well. I'm using Simon Says Stamp holographic cardstock for something a little extra special. I die cut the frame from the holographic cardstock and twice from white cardstock, and I'm gluing those together so that I can have a raised frame around our spooky eye background. So I'm putting glue behind the stacked frame, putting it onto my background and putting something heavy on it while it dries. For a sentiment, I'm using the CZ Design Simon Says Stamp Trick or Treat 2 dies. I cut the shadow from white, and I cut the words from Spellbinder's Onyx Treasured cardstock. It is a pack of black cardstock that is all specialty. I chose the glitter for the words. Now, before we glue that down onto our card, I thought I'd use the new Simon Says Stamp Dotted Spiral 3D Embossing folder on the white note card. Here you can see it in gold, so you can see the pattern better. It is magical. Such a cool embossing folder with such detail. So I have that folder here, and I'm taking a piece of white cardstock and spraying both sides with a bit of water. I do this sometimes because it gives a deeper impression with an embossing folder, and it prevents your cardstock from getting any kind of tearing. Again, I'm using really heavyweight cardstock here. I'll run that through my die cut machine, and we end up with a really cool texture, and I'll glue that onto the front of a white note card that is 4¼ by 5½ inches. I could have done the embossing directly on the front of the note card, but I didn't think of it at the time, so I'm just gluing it on. Now I'll put glue towards the top left corner of that embossing folder background and the bottom left corner of my spooky card panel, and I'll put that at an angle. I just thought the angle was fun, but you definitely could keep it straight if you want. I'm always trying to do things at an angle, but I struggle with it in the end. But a design like this is one of my go-to. And I also did that angled sentiment earlier on. Right over the corner, I'll add my Trick or Treat sentiment using foam squares. Now that die cut is stacked up, so it's strong enough that it won't get squished in the mail, even though I just have foam squares behind it. Once all that is dry, I can flip it over and cut the excess off the edge. So now let's look at our background compared to what the stencil does normally. Remember, the stencil normally does a white background, leaving no inking on the background, and then colorful eyes. I changed it up so I could have that dark background. Again, you can do this with a lot of different stencils, and it gives you a whole new look. So here's our completed card. I did add some black baubles for some of the eyeballs. You could add some Google eyes in there. There's so much you can do with this stencil set, but I decided to keep it simple. We have the sparkle in the eyes, the embossing folder in the background, and that holographic frame, and the glitter sentiment, which adds details to what's really a simple card to make. All right, now let's look at a way to create fast, colorful die cuts. This is something you can do with a lot of different die cuts, but I found it works really well to get a fall watercolor look. Now for this, I am using Tim Holtz Distress inks, but you could use a variety of dye inks that are water-based. You just need to test them out first and see that they react with water. This is a really fast technique. I am starting with Tim Holtz Distress watercolor paper. Any watercolor paper will work. I just really like his because it's bright white. And I am taking Distress ink and just swiping it across the paper. No plans of like blending anything. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is a really forgiving, fast technique. I did a variety of colors such as candied apple, fossilized amber, peeled paint, rusty hinge, and seedless preserves. Now this, I just want to have stripes of color, so there's a variety. Oh, by the way, that's lumberjack plaid that I added in the end. I just want a variety of color close together. I then am spraying that generously with water. You want to spray as much water as you can on here so that it really kind of pools up. So you have kind of a lot of water on here, and then you can see that ink starting to move. Then all you need to do is set it aside to dry. This will be hard because it'll look like a hot mess. For this technique, the hotter the mess, the better the results. So just leave it be and set it aside. Once it's dry, you'll have a mess with lots of colors, but that's perfect. First, I'll be using the Simon Says Stamp Autumn Leaves die. That is these 3 dies that you see here. It makes a bunch of leaves of different sizes. I will also use the fall wreath die set that you see over on the right. These two work really well together or separately. From the autumn leaves die set, I'm taking those dies and putting them onto this dried watercolor paper. You want to make sure it's completely dry first, and I'll die cut from that. Because we have a mix of colors so close together, it'll die cut a bunch of colorful leaves. By the way, I really wanted to use the Acorn bundle. You can see it right there. That's my favorite of the new release. I didn't use it on this particular card, but it works well with these, so I thought I'd mention it. So now I have all of these colorful leaves. Now this can be done with flower dies, any dies you want. Just make sure you put your colors close together when you do your inking technique so that you get the variety on the small die cuts. Now I have the fall wreath die cut. You can see the fall wreath dies there on the right. It's actually 2 arches, and you put them together to form a wreath. I'm going to do it a little different today. I cut those 2 dies from white cardstock, and then I'm taking the autumn leaves dies that we just cut, and I'm gluing them on top. They line up perfectly. So now I can form a wreath without having to really figure out where the leaves should go. It does it for me. So now I have one half of my wreath, and here I can do the other half. Now again, I'm not going to put them in a wreath format on my card, but do know you can easily do that to get a wreath like you see on the packaging on the top right. Now you could do a lot of layering with this. You could make it more full, but I am just following the basic plan that they have with that fall wreath die. So you can see how we have this fun watercolory look of different colors, and it took no time at all. And I have lots of paper left over for a lot more leaves. Now here I have an A2 card where I did gold metallic cardstock. Then I have on top of that a white card panel. I also die cut 2 more halves of the wreaths, glued those together for a stacked look. And I'm putting one towards the bottom and one towards the top, offset so they kind of meet a little bit in the middle. Just trying to get a different look from these wreath dies. So these are just stacked white die cuts. And I'm putting it onto a white background. You could skip this part, but I thought it added some interest and it makes our leaf look even more, or our leaves look even more layered. Now I have the ones we created with the watercolor leaves, and I'm gluing those on top, but I'm not matching them up. So this one that I just glued down doesn't match up with the white one behind it. I'm swapping it so that you have some white leaves sticking out from behind the colored leaves. You could line it up if you prefer, but this just gives a really cool look. I'm once again using the Big Thanks die set from Simon Says Stamp. This is an oldie but a goodie. I did the shadow from white and the word thanks from gold matte metallic cardstock to match the frame that we have on the card. Then I finished that off by adding some gold baubles in the background. So here's a closer look. See those white leaves that are kind of sticking out? I thought that added so much interest, and it makes the colorful leaves look like they're floating on top. But thanks to the design of those 2 die sets, it was really easy to pull together. And I saved a lot of time by inking up those leaves using that watercolor technique. I encourage you to try this if you haven't. I will link at the end of this video to another video where I show this technique and I get colorful flowers. So far we have covered embossing folders, stencils, and die cuts. Now let's look at a way to quickly create a cool background using stamps. This is a longtime favorite technique of mine and one of the fastest techniques I'll ever do. This is the new Simon Says Stamp Sunflower Dreams background stamp. You could use a variety of background stamps for this, but I love the design of this. Now it'd be beautiful in fall colors, but I decided to do something bright because it was a gloomy day when I created this. Now off screen, I white heat embossed that Sunflower Dreams image on watercolor paper. Now on top of that white heat embossed image, I'm pressing Distress ink down. You can see it's messy. It doesn't matter. I'm just going direct to paper, putting down as much ink as I can. I use peacock feathers, picked raspberries, and blueprint sketch. Once again, I'm generously spraying this with water. You'll see puddles form between the white ink, white embossing. This is a resist technique. That white embossing will resist that ink that we put on top. Once it's had some time to dry, look at the beautiful watercolor look we get. Now that pink was a little too bright for me, so I'm coming in with the little seedless preserves and inking that on top, and it just kind of muted it a bit. Then I can trim this down. So this is something you could do with any distress ink colors or any inks that react well with water. Now I trimmed that down and matted it with white cardstock and put it on a white note card. And I chose a Bold Smiles stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. That's an older one. I stamped that sentiment with black ink on white cardstock and used the coordinating die to cut it out. Now you could add so much to this. You could come and do some white colored pencil for highlights. You could do some little gems, but I left it as is. It's a super fast card and a great way to get more out of your background stamps. Now that I've covered fun techniques for pretty much every big category of card making, I just have a few more random cards to share with you. This one shows you how metallic or specialty cardstocks work really well with embossing folders. For the background of this one, I am using Spellbinder's Antique Treasured cardstock. This is like an off-white glossy cardstock and it embosses beautifully. As I mentioned, the Spellbinder's Treasured cardstock packs have a variety of specialty cardstocks in one pack in one color. I encourage you to check them out. They're really high quality. I'm putting this particular piece into the Simon Says Stamp Mod Forest embossing folder. This is a really cool embossing folder, really fun, and look at how cool it looks with that glossy paper. So I encourage you to use your metallic or specialty cardstocks with embossing folders. It really picks up the detail nicely. Now off screen, I die cut 3 circles, one from Concord & Ninth champagne foil paper, one from gold metallic paper, and one from silver metallic paper. And I'm temporarily taping them onto the inside of my embossing folder, onto the raised trees. And you can see how I lined it up with some of the circle trees in the pattern. I will then run that through my die cut machine, and this will give me those individual trees. So there are no dies that coordinate with this, but that's okay. If you have circle dies, that works great. So I did put a little bit of that tape on the back of it just to hold it in place so that it didn't move as we did the embossing. So now that I have these trees that I can pop up, or the top of the trees, I wanted the trunks to them. So I took the same cardstock, just little scraps of it, put it into my embossing folder so that I could get the trunk that matches with the trees that we just embossed. So I'm just laying these pieces in here, running it through, and then I'll cut the tree trunk out so that I can glue the tree trunks and those circle trees together onto that white embossed background. Now this card will have a unique look because it's all quite muted and metallic, but if you wanted to, you could do this from bold, colorful fall colors. I cut that panel down and I'm gluing it towards the top left corner of a white 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. I also once again used the A7 Frame Die set to cut a frame from Concord & Ninth champagne foil paper, and I'm gluing that right around our tree piece so it has a nice frame on that white note card. For a sentiment, I'm using Be Patient. This is a stamp set and a die set that can be used and purchased together or separately. I cut the Be Patient from white cardstock and from a champagne glitter cardstock from Pink Fresh. And then I gold heat embossed a sentiment from the stamp set to go right below it. And I finished it off by adding some gemstones scattered in the background. So you could get a completely different look to this card by using bold colors of cardstock, or you could use that watercolor technique that I showed you on the leaf card. But I thought it was fun to mix all of these specialty cardstocks together and look at how that sentiment stands out. So if you're looking to create something a bit different, try metallic cardstocks in your embossing folders. Now my last cards for today are just ones that I had fun creating with what I thought was a really cool product. So I have 2 cards to share with you. Now this is from the Simon Says Stamp Circle Quilt die set. It has this big die that works great on the front of an A2 card, and then 2 different dies that give you different options for layering on that. So one of the dies gives you this look that I did here. You could mix different colors in there, but I kept it simple by doing tone on tone with pinks. And then the other die allows you to create a quilted look like this one. So you could change up how these pieces are added, but what's really cool about that big circle background die is that it creates little score lines or little marks you can see here. And all you have to do is line up the smaller die cut pieces with those lines. So like here, I'll just line this up on top of the white die cut, making the ends of the pink line up with those little score lines. So basically, you don't have to try to eyeball it. It's easy to line up. And it also works with the other die cut. So for one of my cards, I cut a few extra white background circle die cuts, glued it behind my pink one, and I'm adding it onto a white note card. I put those extra white die cuts behind it so it has some dimension. Then I'm taking some of my leftover pink circles and popping it into the center. So this is one if you like to assemble little die cuts. It doesn't take that long to do and the background is amazing. Now for a sentiment on this, I used the new Simon Says stamp Big Scripty Greetings. I really like that the coordinating dies cut the words out closely, so they really are great for kind of floating on your card. So here's my first completed card. All I did was assemble the circle quilt and add the Sending Big Hugs sentiment that I stamped with black ink on white cardstock. Now you could add little gems to this, you could add things in the circles, but I think this is beautiful and great for any occasion. Now for the other circle quilt card I created, I did add little hearts to the pattern using one of my all-time favorite dies from Simon Says Stamp, the Mini Hearts Party Die. Creates lots of hearts in 3 different sizes, making it fast to use. And on this card, I will be using the new Inside Greetings Birthday Stamp Set and Coordinating Dies from Simon Says Stamp and CZ Design. This is a great set, great for sentiments on the inside of the card too. So I have added little white hearts to my circle quilt pattern on this card, and again put it onto a white card base. I then stamped Sending Birthday Wishes Your Way with black ink on white cardstock, used the coordinating dies to cut it out, and added it onto the card. I then used a stamp sentiment from the same stamp set on the inside of the card. I love how playful this one is. So there you have it, a technique and card showcase, just lots of different ideas. All of these can be done with different products you might have on hand, but if you're interested in what I use, they are linked below in the YouTube description, along with an opportunity for a free gift. Now at the end here, I'll link to a couple videos. One is a new release video that includes the products I used today, and it has 2 big giveaways, so be sure to check that out. And then I will link to another watercolor die cut video. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'll see you soon.